This is ABA On Call. I'm Rick Cabina, joined by my colleague and co-host Doug Kostowitz. If you work in behavior analysis, or you care how behavior actually unfolds in the real world, you're in the right place. Here, we take a clear look at the decisions, patterns, and assumptions that shape our field. No noise, no shortcuts, just a straightforward look at what matters and why. Let's jump into today's conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ABA On Call, Season 8. This is the first episode of Season 8.
Yes.
Doug, you're so old.
I am old, but I'm excited. Season 8's going to be great.
Oh, man. Give me some more rhymes. No, let's not subject the audience to that.
No, 8 is great is enough.
All right. 8 is enough. Hey, that's an old school reference. But we have some differences this coming year. One of it is if you're interested in credit, for those listeners that like credit, we don't do secret words anymore. You recall, you and I talked about this. The BACB is always doing things, making little tweaks here and there. And they made some tweaks. And now for podcasts, there are no longer secret words. For those of you who are interested, there's directions at the end of the podcast on how you can get credit. Just leave it at that. The question is, what should we start off the year with? There's so many things to talk about in this crazy, chaotic world that we live in. All of us come together because we're interested in this science called behavior analysis, and that science can be applied. So we call that applied behavior analysis. And that's many of the people that are here. And while we talk about many different topics, what we decided to do is look back over all the reviewer feedback from last year and take top 3 questions that were asked and answer those. And one of the first questions that we got, which is not surprising, people were asking for more content about how should behavior analysts think about punishment, discipline, ethics, especially if safety is involved or aggression is involved or self-injury is involved. And we thought that that would be a great kickoff topic to hit on. And of course, whenever you talk about punishment, that is incredibly controversial for several reasons. And with punishment, there's a lot of people that have talked about it. And Doug, you and I talked about too, in the future this year, we're going to review Sidman's coercion and fallout. We'll put that aside. That's going to be another episode where we just exclusively focus on this. And one of the, I think, big examples that we talk about here is, with punishment, there's first, what's the context of punishment? Is it someone that is using punishment to shape someone's behavior and you want to change that? Like maybe you're working with a parent and the parent is punishing the child and you want to shape them in another direction. I know you have a lot of stories about that from your past.
Yeah.
Is it someone's doing something and you as a behavior analyst want to apply punishment? I know that it's like, whoa, hands off, nobody can do punishment, but that's not true. And we live in a world where punishment happens. And again, there's a lot of nuance that's involved in that. And just by saying that, some people are like, whoa, wait a minute, this guy's saying we should punish people. Well, there are instances where punishment does happen and punishment isn't unethical. So that's, when I think about this question, that's where we need to center our thinking. Like, what is the exact punishment contingency we're talking about? And then where do we go from there?
So I always step back. When you hear the word punishment, that lives in a special spot for behavior analysts because we view it from a very technical side. We're looking at punishment as a reduction, decrease in behavior in future instances. So if you apply a punishment contingency and you see a decrease, okay, punishment is in effect. Now, punishment shares a different definition view when you step outside the technical language of behavior analysis that is not necessarily shared with behavior analysts. So we
Yep.
may look at something and say, you know what, it's very ethical to use punishment because the outcomes for the individual, perhaps they are creating some serious self-injury. They have some great, so they're self-harm or harming others. We want to get this behavior to decrease the fastest possible. Now, you have to understand all the side effects. You have to understand what punishment teaches, which is nothing. It just teaches the absence, right? It teaches to stop. But ethically speaking, that may be. Now, in the terminology, when you're talking about punishment, that's not shared. Just because someone is using an aversive or a parent is using an aversive does not mean behaviorally, and we know this, it's not punishment, but they're saying, well, I'm going to use punishment to stop this behavior. Well, what if the behavior is increasing? Punishment is in effect, but they're still applying aversives.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing we need to think about if you're even considering it, is a full understanding that there's a technical and then there's a colloquial kind of notion of punishment. And how are you going to sell that? How are you going to implement that? Is that even necessary?
Yeah. That's a really good point. Just we harken back to what we said during the last episode when we talked about ethics and morality. We took a stance on morality, which is uh, we should be looking at this through the lens of science and saying what you're doing, is it increasing or decreasing the well-being of a conscious organism? Again, we took
Right.
that from someone else, but generally speaking, that framework is very helpful to start grounding what you're doing. I was reading this article where they were talking about technical issues with defining punishment, and they gave a really good example. They talked about uh, two people, and the woman wants to decrease her nail biting, and what she does is she brings a friend in, and the friend is every time that she bites her nails, the friend notifies her in some way. So this is a punishment procedure, but it, you could look at that as it's increasing the well-being for this person, and certainly that aversive of someone saying, "Hey, you're biting your nails," is having a very positive effect. And you could argue that that punishment procedure, and this is what the authors argue, is warranted in that situation.
Right. And because we're behavior analysts, we may implement something like that, but understanding that punishment alone is not a treatment plan, right?
Exactly.
Understanding that we need to give a replacement behavior. I mean, we want to see a decrease, and it may be that we want to see that decrease faster than maybe what a differential reinforcement may afford. It may be we want to teach some other skill. Maybe we want to get something fast to decrease, but we always have a void created when you use punishment. We need to give some replacement behavior. So understanding that as well, if the nail biting is happening, we need to give them something else to do with their hands, etc.
Right.
That so it can't be left to just punishment. So and I'm still harkening back to our original question, how should we think about this? We think about this as one tool in the tool belt. Not only that, it's supercharged in society. So understanding how we convey that and matching it with the questions like, is this going to promote well-being? Should we be using a strict punishment procedure for a unimportant behavior that's just annoying? Probably that's not going to be the most effective way. But again, these are questions when it comes up, It's usually associated with things that are dangerous, things that are harming the individual if they're left to their own. So it's it's a tricky situation, but it should not be taboo. It should be
Yeah.
well known within your repertoire, and it may be something that you may need to help an individual.
Yeah. It's almost like we need a scorecard, and the scorecard would say, here's the things you must look out because you've already hit upon it. Punishment doesn't teach new behaviors. So that would go on the scorecard. Uh, Secondly, punishment's addictive because it works very quickly to suppress behavior and you're going to want to use it more. So that's on the scorecard. Punishment can create really negative effects, emotional behavior and counter control, all of these other things that should be on the scorecard. So this topic, it's a really strong question in answering this in a way of saying, look, the easy way is just saying, okay, everything we do in the world, we're never going to look at punishment. And that people could do that and people do that and people platform that. But another way of looking at that is, are there some conditions, if you have this scorecard and you look at this very, very responsibly and say, is this something, again, this is a moral issue. And of course, it's being informed by the science. I feel like I could keep talking about this
Yeah,
issue because it's so important. And we don't want to come across as like, yeah, green light, punish everything, make that the
no.
first thing that you do. And there's enough out there that we know, and all behavior analysts should know this, that punishment is never, ever the first tool you're pulling out if you're going to use that analogy on the tool belt.
But it has to be a tool within your repertoire, if for no other reason than your recognition of what's going on in the client's environment. You may be able to identify certain things that are happening that you think may be functioning as punishment, but they're not. You may find some
Yeah.
things that you never would have understood, never would have thought would function as punishment, but they are. So you cannot ignore this notion, and you have to have it in there to potentially be the most moral thing that you do with this person. So
That's right.
it's you cannot ignore this.
That's right.
It's but you cannot use it as your go-to technique.
Right.
So, well, this brings us to our second topic that was brought up. And so the question I'll pose to you, Rick, and it's very similar. Uh, what do we do when good intentions backfire? How can ABA accidentally cause harm? And how do we prevent that?
Yeah, boy. I've thought a lot about this issue and preparing for this show.
Hmm.
And I can think back, you and I, as we're getting older, we certainly have seen a lot of things. And myself, I have been a consultant since I started off in 96. So I've
Hmm.
been consulting for, what is that, 30 some years. And I've seen a lot. And I've also had the honor and privilege of being involved children's lives for long periods of time. And I think back to how ABA was, and every science and even applied science like ours are always evolving. And there was this instance where I was around a young man for a long period of time. And this young man was getting, I don't even know how you describe it, uh, behavior modification, ABA, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we're engaging in lots of compliance training. And I remember seeing this young man as a child, and uh, I was working with other people, but I just, this was a young man that stood out to me. And through the years, every time he would say no or try to do or refuse something, compliance, compliance. You will do this. You will do this. Well, fast forward to when this kid is like 16, and my heart breaks for this kid because now he's like a robot. And everything that you say to him, he will do it. And I'm just like, it breaks my heart to think about this kid that got all of this good ABA. and let's do compliance training. And compliance training means following instructions, and it means always following instructions. And although I've observed this still goes on to this day, Doug. When
Yeah.
people talk about compliance training, and more people are sensitive to this issue. But here's this young man, and for so many years of just being beat down, like this was ABA gone wrong, and the people that were doing it at the time throughout his man's life, we're being told by other behavior analysts, no, we need to do compliance. No, we need to get him to follow instructions, because if you can't follow instructions, you can't learn, and all these other things. And yes, that's true. But the way this compliance training played out in this young man's life was he was given a grave disservice through ABA. And that is where good intentions backfire. And for the rest of my life, like I sometimes think, I'm so haunted by this. And I think, like, okay, even though I wasn't involved, is there something I could have done to change this? Because, like, I don't know where that young man is now, but seeing him and knowing that he was in his environment, and wow, it just, it makes me emotional telling you this story and recounting it, because this is an instance where ABA completely did not do the service for this young man when you look at his outlook in life.
So that's a horrible story from an individual's perspective. I look at this as well from a behavior analyst perspective. Thing we have to remember is number one, we're individuals and environment, right? We're not, just because we know about behavior analysis, we're not above the contingencies. So now you have individuals who get reinforced for certain techniques that they implement, and it could be the right time and right place. As you go through your career, you are on schedules of reinforcement for implementing certain techniques. You start to show that bias towards certain techniques that you begin to implement that seem to work. And then what could happen is we lose some of that individual analysis for situations and start to revert back to, we're going to use techniques that have really worked for us in the past. We come into that notion, well, we just need a contract. We just need this. And you see these individuals, behavior analysts, that may be implementing techniques because they worked in the past with other kids or individuals, and they start to overly rely on those because of the success they have. And what can happen is very similar to what you've got. You're producing perhaps not the best gains for this individual, but it's the technique that you're the most comfortable with, or the implementing certain things. And that can cause problems for you and for others. Then you look at the contingencies that are on those behavior analysts in certain systemic situations where we're promoting, I'm going to use my last topic. We can never use punishment. And that's, so so we have to use everything, and it could inadvertently teach some behavior, further establish a negative behavior for that individual, because you slice some of the tools away because you have to meet more global roles instead of you fighting that system and saying, we need to do something to stop a behavior quickly for the individual's well-being. So you think about ABA, fantastic science, not going to complain, but we look for outcomes, and then we can sometimes get, I don't want to say spoiled, but we become established doing certain things. And then that excludes the whole technique that we should be doing when we're approaching an individual.
Yeah. This question, I don't want it to be triggering and for us to be like, oh, here's all the bad things that happen in ABA, because there's enough of that out there. And we do need to be aware that anytime you have people working with other people, and whether this is ABA, whether this is medicine, uh, social work, counseling, whatever, you have imperfect people working with imperfect people. And this is part of being a human. And all we can do is keep trying our best. And you would hope that the field, like our field, is grappling, and they'll continue to grapple with these ethical issues. What do you do in this instance? What do you do in this instance? And it's never, there's never a handbook that says, do this, don't do that, because that's not the way the world works. And understanding so much of, as a behavior analyst, how are you doing things? And this can, I feel, help guide you. And this is how I've lived my life. And this is how all the students that I work with, I try to teach them to be, the behavior analysis was founded on the science part first, the analytical part first, which means uh, having the best data that you can out there. You and I talk about that a lot, Doug. Uh, it's funny. Some people will, this happened to me twice in this past week. Like, oh, here's a graph that Rick Cabina might not like. And I've just got this reputation for, oh, if it's not a standard acceleration chart, this guy's going to hate it, which is, I get how that I got that reputation. But what we champion is the best visual data graphics out there to help
Mhm.
you understand what your data are telling you. That's what we go for. And it just so happens that the chart is better than when people make their own stuff up. But that doesn't mean that if you have a scatter plot or something else, I'm going to somehow reject that. So at any rate, I think this question gets at, how do you do this science in an applied way, but yet you are leaning on these important parts of behavior analysis, which is, understanding the contingencies, having great data collection, having great data analysis, wrapping that in, doing iterations, so that you can prevent uh, doing something that could accidentally harm somebody. And again, even in the best situation, you're human, and maybe something goes wrong. And if that does happen, learn from it, figure out where you fell flat, and never do it again, or try never to do it again, and just do things better.
Okay. Couple things. One, you're not the only one that gets told that you're not going to like this graph. I get told that a lot too.
That's true.
Second, what I'm hearing here is we can see that we cause harm, but regarding accidentally, etc., how do we prevent that? Is don't skip steps. I'll get questions. So I teach a lot of pre-service educators. They come to me with, oh, I got a kid doing X, Y, and Z. And they want my quick feedback. And my first thing I say is, oh no, I'm not telling you anything to do. If you want some ideas, I'm going to sit down and ask you about 50 questions. I want to find out what's going on. What have you tried to this? So it would be really easy for me to say, oh, try this intervention, do a contract, be done with it. You can. So if you want, we have the steps out there. We have assessment steps. We have observation. We have methods to identify, as you said, the contingencies. When we run into problems, identifying the pinpoint of the behavior, examining the data, making decisions. If the data aren't doing what we want, figure out why. We have the steps. I think what happens is when we have difficulties is when we try to move quickly through the steps or skip steps. And we could be in that situation, but neither of us do that to the best of my knowledge. We've been in behavior analysis for 30 years. It would be very easy us to rely on experience, but we try desperately to stick to, hey, I'm not going to jump to a conclusion because our science is based on individual behavior in those environments. And we got to go find out what's going on in that environment to figure out what's going on in the behavior. So the good intentions there is don't skip steps. You have techniques to help. Doesn't mean we can control all the contingencies. That doesn't mean we can do everything. That's not to say if you go through all the steps, you're not going to make mistakes. But if you, within there are corrections and directions that can help minimize all of these aspects. Always be nervous if you're saying, oh, you have a kid with intellectual disabilities, do this.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is not how we roll.
Wow. Solid answer. I, I again, great question. I feel we could continue talking about this for the entire episode, but let's move on and get to our third question, which was dealing with burnout. And burnout, something that if you're an RBT, if you're a BCBA, uh, how could you craft a situation that's more humane, that's more ethical, that lessens burnout? And these are really issues, powerful issues that if we think about our science, it's all about behavior, and these issues are stemming from behavior.
Right.
People that there are articles out there that'll give you the reasons for why does burnout happen? High workload, not having a lot of control. Like I've worked with some RBTs in the past who they might be in a center, are in a center, and have a lot of students that they have to work with, or clients, and they see things and they collect data, but yet nobody listens to them. And it's like, okay, you're a cog in the machine and you just go ahead and do what I tell you to do. And sure, if you have some insight, that's great, but we're not going to do anything about it. Uh, there's all kinds of issues around billing and people being BCBAs being pressed to do things in billable hours and make money. And I'm sure many of you listening are like, yeah, I could share stories with you. And we could go on and list all of these many different issues that deal with burnout. But what we have to think about as behavior analysts are, number one, what's your role in your organization? And number two, how might you help contribute to arranging conditions that are more humane and that are lessening burnout?
Yeah, I don't. This sounds like a OBM issue, and it looks at the relationships between your owner. I'm thinking like a clinic or something. You've got your owner, you got your BCBAs, you've got your RBTs. You definitely need to have increased teamwork. But what I worry about is what promotes this is then goes back to our previous question of you cannot skip steps through the
Yeah.
process and just say, oh, we have a child with autism. Let's immediately jump in. We're going to do let's go. Wait, was that the needs? And I'm not saying people do that. I'm saying that is a route that perhaps an organization can promote. We have a way, and that's just, they need to fit our way, etc. So you have, like you said, an issue where we have to look at those conditions. I don't know. Those are very individual questions, and I don't want to jump to an overall big conclusion, like I just said about skipping steps. I don't want to jump to some conclusion how to keep an RBT from experience and burnout, etc. But these are definitely areas to explore in an approach. If you've got a variety of people, trying your best to maintain those relationships, listen to each one, allow them to be part of the process, etc. Those are just some observations that I would have, but those are good questions. I
Oh,
don't, I can't make more money happen from an insurance agency. I can't do that.
yeah. I feel that if you take an analysis of, like, this is something a lot of people have heard. Oh, we have a toxic workplace. Well, what does a toxic workplace mean? Whenever people use that term, what they're getting at are there's people in there that are doing things that are negative. The toxic workplace could be you got some jerk that's saying mean things to other people, or you have a supervisor that's pressing you in a direction to go where you don't want to go, or maybe the organization itself is doing things that you just don't feel comfortable with. And when you have that thing that you don't feel comfortable with, there's likely a reason that's pushing your buttons. We just talked about compliance training, and I gave that example. Again, I want to point out that I'm in no way saying, oh, never do compliance. Sure, people do need to listen and follow directions, but what I was sharing is just the
Compliance for
unintelligent
the sake
way.
of compliance.
Exactly. Thank you. Uh, but with that in mind, in your organization, uh, is that just what your organization is doing? Or like, if you notice that, could you talk to people and say, you know what are these independent skills, these behaviors that are really going to make the folks we're working with, this gets to social validity, more meaningful than just these general skills that everybody gets. If I'm involved in an organization and I'm seeing them just apply this blanket, whatever, wherever they got it from, and then it's given to everybody, that's not behavior analysis. That's a factory. That's not, there's no individualization with that. So how can you make that workplace better? You bring these issues up and you look at, can you make changes? And sure, that's not ever pleasant when you're the person who's trying to advocate for changes, but ethically, you should do that and you'll feel better about yourself. And if you can help push this organization towards something like that, that's not going to affect just you. It's going to affect the clients and it's going to affect the other people in the organization. So you can start thinking about these issues that could be toxic, that could be indicative of uh, these issues that are leading to burnout, and make a change or try to make a change.
I think it comes back to relationships and listening, and rather than commanding and demanding. If you if there because there is definitely a hierarchy where we most of us work within behavior analysis see that there's the people that supervise these and there's the people that supervise those. And if you can build, and this is normal workplace environment type of things, I don't think that there is, and I could be wrong. My inclination is that there's burnout in a variety of fields. I mean,
Oh, of course.
these aren't different questions that are being asked. Special educators burn out, right? If you're working in this field, if you're working in helping people, there tends to be burnout. But there's also burnout in Wall Street. There's burnout everywhere. But I think this some of the characteristics of places that don't have the burnout come back to the relationships, the ability to listen. It may not be the most money. In fact, I've had kids who listen to me, students who are supervising certain places, they make more money, but I'm like, this is horrible. I got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And like, I don't pay your bills. So you make whatever decision you want, you're getting supervision. So it comes back to the relationships. What's the value? How are they being taught? Is there effective supervision occurring? Is it supportive or is it, toxic, as you mentioned? So I don't have a exact, but it really, I think, goes back to the relationships that are formed, even if they are supervisor and supervisee relationships. They should be as effective as possible.
Sure. Supervision. Uh, I think of a colleague of mine that wrote an article, and it was a really solid one where she looked at many of the issues in burnout. And again, the colleague happens to be an OBM, and you were right that a lot of these are organizational in nature. And like you were talking about paraprofessionals, aides, whatever you want to call them, and would be similar to like an RBT, where you're serving a vital function in the classroom. And one issue that I've seen in the special ed literature and one issue I've seen in the behavioral literature is if you take someone and you throw them in with a child who's highly aggressive and you don't give them the skills or you don't train them well enough, guess what's going to happen? Your burnout is going to be super high. And again, this is an organizational issue. And yes, you have a problem. Now you have this student over here or this client over here that is challenging and is just burning through staff. And so what do? You maybe pay them more money and you you're going to recycle the same issue. You're never going to fix it. So if you spot this, you have to make a couple decisions here. Is someone going to address this organizationally, or if this is the way things are going to go, then you might be just better off going somewhere else because you're
I
going to
think
burn out.
so we can talk to the people who are running the organization as an examination, but this is also out there for those budding RBTs. This is some things to look for
Yeah,
when you're interviewing. This is things to look for. Not necessarily, obviously, if you walk in and there's people that are in the corner going, do not work here, that might be a good signal that it's a toxic environment. But if you're seeing this the ability, or they're mentioning, hey, you bring me a problem and you try to bring them a problem and they want to help you try and fix it, those are the characteristics that you can look for that could help identify a place that maybe you're not likely to burn out. No, obviously, we come back to the individual. It may be that the person's just not meant to be there. They don't meet with the right
sure.
contingencies, regardless of how wonderful it is. But generally speaking, there is a higher level of burnout than people should be. So, and I think that's in the field. So I think it's a great question. I think these three questions sort of all played off of each other as we thought about it. And I do want to reach out and say thank you to everyone who's sharing all of these topics. We love to build on, address, and I'm very excited as a preview to review Coercion as Fallout at some point during the season. So hopefully you'll keep an eye out for that. So,
Doug, I have an admission I want to make.
uh-oh.
You in the audience, and that is, I love our audience. All of you that have listened to us and have given us your feedback, it's wonderful that you're interactive. It's wonderful that you're thinking deeply about these issues, because us, like you, we care about this field. We want it to succeed. And you are attracted to this field like us because it's a helping profession and we want to help people. And together, raising issues, talking about these things, looking at the science, and just continuing to learn, that's the way we make things better. And if I can echo what you just said, very, very strong questions. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. It went very quickly as usual. And we will talk more about other issues this season. And just to remind you again, to repeat myself, we did make the change, no secret words, which that was interesting. No secret words. We've been doing that for how many years? So listen to the end credits for how you can get credit if you want that. And let me thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call. You've been listening to ABA On Call. Conversations like this keep our field moving, and we're glad to have you with us. If you're completing the CEU, take a moment to finish the quiz. Until our next episode, keep looking closely and thinking critically.